Welcome back to Survival Outdoors and our video series about cold weather clothing and layering. In this episode, we are going to talk about the second layer, which is generally referred to as mid-layer or your insulation layer, or even thermal layer in some cases. What I have here is perhaps the thinnest or the lightest of my insulation layers. Now, those of you who are familiar with the US military's extended cold weather clothing system, you might recognize this or think that this is very similar to that system's level 2 thermal top, aka the waffle top, and you would be right. This is indeed very similar in looks. Of course, this is now in different color, but this is in fact 511 Tactical's Stratos quarter zip. Made mostly out of polyester with some elastane in it to give it some flexibility. This has exactly the same kind of grid or waffle pattern as the US military waffle top has. Very similar in many ways. Has good cut raglan sleeves, flat lock seams. Again, very long sleeves. This is size medium, and I would not describe myself as size medium guy, but regardless, you might want to go again size down unless you are a bit bigger fellow, then go through to your size. But anyway, for me personally, I was happy to see that finally someone makes clothes with long enough sleeves for me. Now this top alone isn't going to get you very far in terms of those cold temperatures, depending again of course your activity levels, but generally speaking I don't mind combining mid layers. So I would rather have a very thin base layer and then let's say a couple of mid layers and then again rather a thin top layer or the outer layer covering everything. But we'll get to those outer layers and what their function is later on in this series. But now as we move on and I show you a bit different type of insulation layers, keep in mind that all of those work as standalone pieces on top of your base layer, but they can be combined if need be. Same goes for this. I think this is very versatile again because it's quite lightweight construction. Definitely works as a standalone shirt during fall or spring times, but as a mid layer during winter, definitely good to go, especially because it does have a bit of a raised color, and that's something that I would like to see in regardless of the weather. In some of my layers there should be a bit of raised color because I don't like to wear thick scarves or anything around my neck, because neck is of course something that you want to protect always, but you also want to regulate that heat when you are doing something on like a high activity level, for example pulling a pulk and backcountry skiing and so forth. So you might occasionally want to ventilate and let that air circulate a bit around your neck to release that excess heat. But at the same time, you want to have something that covers your neck. Of course, wearing a thin buff or something is another option, but again, we'll go through those in a later video. But anyway, 511 Tactical Stratos quarter zip. Quite a flexible piece of clothing, definitely usable throughout the year, I would say, but works as a lightweight mid layer for me. Let's jump on to next, sort of still in this kind of military-ish theme going forward, and also level 2 clothing. What I have here is Varustelekas Särmä TST level 2 long johns and a shirt. Now, as the name implies, these are again level 2 clothing, just as the original Army extended cold weather clothing system waffle top was. So I believe that was level 2 thermal layer, and this is also level 2 made by Varusteleka. Now, these are 80% merino wool, 20% polyamide. Anyway, once again, there needs to be some other fabric mixed with merino wool to give some durability to it. Still bit of flex, but definitely not as much as in, for example, this material. So these really flex a lot. However, the sizing, this is size L now on the top, and sleeves are definitely long enough. And actually, I did not mention with the Stratos quarter zip But same with this one. You can see how long this hem is. Like almost, well, not my mid thigh, but maybe 1/3 of my thigh gets covered. And this is something that you want to keep an eye out also when getting winter clothing or winter layering. I actually prefer something that is as long as this, because this also covers then your butt. And your butt is a big area of, well, for most of us, it's mostly, or at least there's considerable amount of fat on your butt, and that can get cold quite easily. So having a long hem like this does provide additional insulation to your behind as well. Generally speaking, again, high collar can be of course turned if it's too much for you. Similar raglan sleeves, flat lock seams. So again, those same things that I like to see in my clothing are visible here. This one also has place for your rank, military rank, and I do wear this set when doing military exercises. Now, some people do use this set as their first layer, and again, nothing wrong with that, but as a personal preference, I would like to have something thinner than this as my base layer and then put this on top if needed. This is quite heavy. This is compared to the base layers that we covered in the first episode. I believe this is something like twice the fabric weight at least. So there's definitely a big difference. And that is why this is level 2 in Varusteleka's own system as well, not level 1. All right, but I think now we have covered what's the point and what kind of things you should look for in these lighter mid layers. Let's go on to the heavier ones, where we get to see some proper insulation values then. Now, this is a bit of an oddball. This used to be Fjällräven elk sweater made out of 100% wool, and then these reinforcements are made out of the G1000 fabric that Fjällräven is somewhat known for. And I've cut away the sleeves for this because I have other wool shirts. I don't need so many. I got this one out of some outlet a couple of years ago. Cannot remember what price this was, but I remember that the full standard price for this was way too much for what I would ever pay for a wool sweater. But as I said, with a discounted price, why not get it? And I cut away the sleeves to have a vest for myself because I lacked one previously. Now I specifically have this vest now to be combined with one of my outer layers, but we'll cover that on the next episode. But generally speaking, vest is quite popular type of clothing these days. Many people have like puffy vests and so forth, but they tend to wear those then as a final layer, whereas I prefer to think layering in a way that you should always strive to put clothing on you and never be in the situation, especially in winter conditions, where you would have to take out your outer layer and then add insulation layer and then put your outer layer again on top, because that always increases the risk of you being exposed to the elements, especially if it's high winds or right now around 0 degrees. And if it would be really like windy and wet snow coming down, I would not want to be in a situation where I would take off my jacket or whatever outer layer in order to put on insulation layer for a while and then put on the jacket on top. It's just extra hassle and something that I would not want to expose myself to. Vests definitely have their place, and I can understand why they are so popular these days, because they are, of course, without sleeves, so lighter, take less space in your backpack, and generally speaking, might be more versatile pieces of clothing than a normal sweater or a normal puffy jacket, for example. Main downside, of course, is because of the lack of sleeves, these are not the greatest options for those folks who might have problems with their blood circulation in their extremities, so in their fingers and so forth, because you need to warm that blood while it travels from your heart to your fingertips. And if you don't have enough layers on your arm, then of course that blood is going to get colder faster, and eventually you'll get cold hands if you're wearing just stuff around your midsection. So there's that. Now let's look at something else. This is Keliluppo merino wool jacket. Now, as I mentioned, it is a jacket, so it can be worn as an outer layer. However, it is a very thin jacket, so as a piece of winter clothing and cold weather clothing, I rather use this as a mid layer. But as seen on my previous videos, I have used this on top of my standard outer layer as an additional insulation. It is quite handy to put on top of your outer layer because of this zipper. Again, this comes quite high, but not as high as the first two pieces of clothing shown in this video, but still it does cover your neck a bit. But because it is so thin, I rather use it as a mid layer. Made of merino wool, so there's also the durability issue that we've been discussing here previously. So also because of that, using it as a mid layer then protects this jacket, which is quite pricey. So I rather keep this in good shape, and therefore as a mid layer it works quite nicely. Has a couple of small pockets up front for additional storage, which is actually quite handy thing to have during winter. You want to store, let's say, batteries and things like that close to your body, so not necessarily in the pockets of your outermost layers, but somewhere in your mid layer area. So there's an additional benefit of Keliluppo as a mid layer. But I have still one more mid layer to go, and that is the heaviest of them all. So let's take a look at that. And here we go. Of course, I couldn't make this video without mentioning the good old wool shirt. This one belonged to my dad, just some old wool shirt, 100% wool. That's all you really need to care about. Doesn't get any better than that. Just get your hands on whatever wool shirt which is 100% wool, and thicker it is, the better it is. As a mid layer, they last forever. And also, if you want to have something that can be occasionally used as an outer layer as well, let's say you're doing some camp chores, chopping up firewood or something, and you want to take your perhaps a bit nicer and more expensive jacket off, then look for military surplus wool shirts, because they have those reinforcements around the elbows as well as up here, and generally speaking tend to be quite cheap and still quite durable. So that's definitely a solid option for everyone. And also those are quite plentiful, available almost everywhere in the world. And the model seems to be exactly the same no matter what military has used or made those wool shirts originally. So they always look almost exactly the same, whether it's Finnish or British or German or whatever. Just get a good wool shirt. I think everyone should own at least one, and it doesn't get any better and warmer than this. But as mentioned earlier in this video, definitely you can combine these mid layers together, because for example now you can see this is has a kind of a standard color. So my neck is now exposed, and as I mentioned previously, I really want something to be on here covering my neck, because at least personally me, I can get some issues quite quickly if my throat is exposed during winter. So combining maybe the Stratos quarter zip or the Särmä, Varusteleka Särmä TST level 2, whatever turtleneck, those have high colors, and then throw something like this on. That's an extremely warm and good setup to go. But again, not something that I would use when I'm moving about and active. Even in -25, if you are moving rapidly, you can get away with quite little in terms of clothing. But as always, remember to control your sweating. I know it's a cliche to say you sweat, you die. There's some truth to that, but if you have good layering system in place, those clothes will transfer that moisture away from your body to the next layers and so forth. So you are probably not going to die if you sweat a bit during winter. At least I haven't died so far. My biggest issues are with circulation, so gloves and socks, and those are not impacted if I sweat. In fact, when I'm active, those get warm, and I'm therefore happier the more active I am during winter. But that is just me and my own observations. That's the mid layer or insulation layer covered in this video. Next up, we're going to look at outer layer, and again, going through from the least insulating to the most insulating. There's a wide variety of clothing that can be covered in that video, so stay tuned for that.